Very windy in Portimao, Portugal today, Friday, but gorgeous weather on a gorgeous circuit as well. But it all meant that with the Pirelli tyres even harder than they were last year, and they were pretty slippery last year as well, it was very rare. In fact, I don't think we saw a perfect lap in terms of 3 complete sectors. Usually it was purple, yellow, green, or purple, purple, yellow, something like that. It was difficult under braking. It was difficult as they turned in, as they put the power on. And I think in those greasy conditions, it's probably the right word, unpredictable, certainly. We saw a difference today between the Red Bull and the Mercedes that was quite stark to my eye. You saw a lot of Lewis doing this on exits of corners, obviously in perfect control in terms of what he was doing, but the back end was moving around a lot. Max had the car much more stable. And I think it's interesting to see on a circuit like Portimao with all its beautiful elevation changes and blind approaches to some corners, and beyond that, braking with load in the car in some parts of the lap. When you've got a downforce advantage, which Red Bull would appear still to have, that's going to help you even more when you've got G-load going in various directions. So Lewis is doing all he can to get the car as straight as he can as soon as possible, but Max is able to get the car loaded with all these different dynamics going on a little bit earlier than Lewis. Having said all of that, the graphic came up again showing that Max brakes earlier than Valtteri Bottas, earlier than Carlos Sainz, earlier than Lewis Hamilton, Max Verstappen. As I say, you can have this image in your mind of Max Verstappen being a very, very brave racing driver who brakes incredibly late. Well, he isn't. He brakes, he will be brave. I'm sure he's very brave, but he doesn't brake as early as his peers. And that's to his credit, I think. It's very easy to fall into the trap of wanting to be as late as possible. I mean, this is where Valtteri Bottas is going right now. He's braking later on one graphic. He's braking later than Carlos Sainz, would you believe? And Carlos Sainz is a late braker, always has been, always will be. And there's Valtteri in the Mercedes braking later than Carlos. And I think the other point to make about Max, and I made this at Imola, but it's much more so now, where you've got this elevation and you've got these wind changes, and it was very gusty in FP2 in Portugal today. When you are an earlier braker, let's put Max in that category, it also instills a certain patience in your driving, of everything happening a little bit slower, allowing more time for everything. And it was very noticeable today in a couple of the tight corners how patient Max Verstappen was with his throttle application. He was just waiting until the car was settled and then squeezing it on beautifully, where he saw a lot of other drivers quite greedy in terms of getting on the power, running wide, missing a geometric apex. Not sure on slow corners today in modern Formula One how much difference that makes. I mean, it goes back, actually, I'm really getting away from the subject here, but it first struck me in the Michael Schumacher days at Suzuka at the hairpin, how unimportant on slow corners, when you got so much grip, the geometrical apex is these days. Well, even going back to Michael's day. And I think it certainly applies today. As a vehicle with a lot of downforce, and even if the Pirellis are a bit hard, it's still got a massive amount of grip, the current Formula One car. And you can see the missing apeces, and Lewis still putting a very good lap together. So I'll try and put the day together. It was a fairly complicated day, I think, to watch. Maybe some people it distilled quite well, but I found it quite a complex day. The morning session for me was summed up by Max Verstappen being about as quick as Lewis in the Mercedes, obviously, and Valtteri was quite quick too. About as quick, even though he was complaining like crazy about massive vibration in the car. This is a sort of Mario Andretti thing, Colin, yeah, I know we're 2 seconds quicker than everybody else, but the vibration is terrible, man. We got to do something about it. And Max was sort of doing all this. It was what you do when you are very, very confident of where you are and you're looking at all these details, and call it psyching out. Everybody would have heard it on the radio. Oh, Max has got this big, presumably tire vibration. It might have been some sort of thing in the diff, I don't know, but I suspect it was some sort of tire vibration, a function of how difficult it was to get the tyres up to temperature at exactly the right rate. And there he was complaining about this vibration. The car is undrivable, said Max, and he was still all but P1, within a thousandth of a second. I thought that was amusing. It was interesting to see Fernando Alonso, I thought, in FP1 as well. He'd driven once at Portimao before this in, I think it was a very wet test session where presumably he didn't learn very much. So he went out, and whilst everybody else was out on the hard tyre initially in FP1, he was out on the medium tyre, which is a really logical thing to do. Give yourself a bit of grip, give yourself a bit of confidence, and right away he was into it. You could tell straight away that Fernando was dialed in, if that's the right word. I hate to say that because, of course, it is a function of how the car feels as well. But you could just see he's starting afresh. It's a nice circuit with some nice corners, elevation changes, blind entries, sort of Fernando Alonso territory. And he was very quickly into a reasonably quick lap time. What that meant, of course, is that when everybody else went to mediums, he went to hard. So he was kind of out of sync in FP1. So it was difficult to judge what Fernando was going to do as the day progressed. But we'll get onto that in a minute. The Mercedes, to my eye, as I say, they've certainly made changes. I mean, if you want to see what they're doing to the sides of the car, and also Red Bull to the floor, go to Scarbs, and we'll have him on next week, obviously, to go through some of the development detail of what's been happening. But to me, there is still a difference there. Everybody's saying it's really close, and the lap times look close. But Max didn't get anything like a free good lap in FP1, and it was kind of the same story in FP2. Lewis did a lot more runs, a lot more laps, looked a lot more consistent, perhaps you could say, in terms of the way they're running. And Max was a little bit long pit stops, coming out again, going out, doing a time, bit of traffic. I don't think we should read too much into the gap as it is at the moment. And obviously Lewis is really, really good now at putting a Q lap together, a qualifying lap. So it could well be very, very close tomorrow. But if we look, I mean, there was a telling moment at the end of FP2 when the Red Bull engineer for Sergio Perez got on the radio as he was coming into the pit lane and said, Lewis is doing high 23s, Max is doing low 23s. It was like, information. And I think a lot of people would thought, wow, that's obviously the race set up, long runs. That's quite a big difference if that's the case. So let's just have a look actually at what they did. And when they weren't actually out on the track at the same time until the back end of FP2 doing any sort of runs together. And I think that's quite important on a day when there were changeable weather conditions, wind direction changes certainly, because at some parts of the afternoon, for sure, the track would have been quicker or slower than at others. But when they were out together, Max was doing 22.9, 23.1. So that kind of filters in nicely with what Sergio's race engineer was saying, low 23s. Lewis was doing 23.4. I got him at a 23.4, which I wouldn't call that a high 23, but he was doing a few 23.8s, 23.9s as well. So whether or not Red Bull had clocked that lap or a couple of laps around the 23.3, 23.4 region for Lewis, I don't know. To me, it's about 2 or 3 tenths probably on in a race situation with the tyres having to extend over a full stint. That's what it looks like. It's still quite a lot, of course, but it's certainly not 0.7, which is the radio message that was given to Sergio. Another interesting one, I always think it's interesting to look at the intra-team dramas, and Ferrari is always a good one to watch. Charles Leclerc and Carlos Sainz, of course, this year. In a car that's getting a little bit better with every race. It's pretty drivable now. It's got a very good engine. Well, very good. As good as a Renault, probably. And they're getting a lot out of the car. This was the best day for sure yet that Carlos Sainz has had in the Ferrari team. He looked really good, pretty consistent, had an off or two, but no more than anybody else. He was even joking with his engineer at the end about, I don't know, going to have another coffee or something. I think it was something to do with showing him a pit board and making sure he could read the pit board, but I suspect they got the pit board out at the wrong time or something, and he said, we'll go and have another coffee, or you've been drinking too much coffee or something like that. Anyway, it was quite Carlos Sainz, as you know. Anyway, on the soft tyre for one lap, at the moment, Sainz did a 20.1 and Charles Leclerc a 20.3, which is a big, big thing in the life of Carlos Sainz, I would have thought. I don't think it's that big a deal for Charles Leclerc, and I don't know why he was 2 tenths slower, where he lost that time. If I had to guess, I would say it was traffic stroke, having a moment, trying to work out what to do when the wind is blowing in this direction, that direction, and using all this information should he need it in the race on Sunday. That's the way Charles Leclerc works. He's pretty good at thinking 2 days ahead, Jackie Stewart-like in the way he goes about his racing. But certainly on this day, Carlos Sainz had the edge in terms of lap time on the soft tyre, which is pretty good. And then on the medium tyre, when they're doing longish runs, Charles did a 22.9, Carlos a 23.2. Those are the best of the runs, but they were pretty close. But it shows that Charles was doing his usual, the car's not that good with a bit of fuel in it, we've lost some grip, and he's just manipulating the car beautifully. So you're probably finding Charles has the edge there. And then they both did long runs on soft tyres as well, which was quite interesting. Charles did a 23.8 best and Carlos a 23.9, but you could say, that was over a 5 or 6 lap run. So both of them very, very even on that. Fernando, as I say, looked really good, I thought, in the morning. He was running in juxtaposition in terms of the compound, so we couldn't really tell too much what was going on in FP1. FP2, he did a really good job. They went out on soft tyres at the beginning and did a 20.2, which is a really quick time. Just as a reminder, there's Charles Leclerc doing a 20.3 and Carlos Sainz a 20.1. So, wow, good. I mean, Scarb's absolutely right. There was everybody ready to say, what is this weird engine shape that Alpine have got now? And Scarb's saying last week, and if you haven't seen it, watch the video, no, it's going to work. They just need to get the aero balance right. And it looks like they've got a really good, they've got a good balance on the Alpine, a better balance on the Alpine for downforce and therefore drag than, say, McLaren had today, probably. So they're right up there today. They were right up there today. Whether they will be tomorrow, of course, is another day, another story, and the circuit will be picking up more grip, and it may not be as windy, who knows. But I think that crosswind situation also sort of, as I say, is very Fernando Alonso-esque, isn't it? He loves those sorts of dramas. But so Fernando 20.2, and he went out and he did a 20.8 on another run as well. So it wasn't a fluke, a 20 and a 20.9. So he was there on the soft tyre. Then on the race tyre, the medium tyre, he's doing 24s, then a 23.4, 23.8, 23.6. This is pretty good. And if you look at Lando Norris's runs, and Lando didn't have a great day today, had a few dramas going on with the car. He was in the garage for quite a long time in FP1 and it lost like 24 minutes in the garage in FP2 as well. So he didn't string a lot of laps together, which is probably quite difficult when the circuit is this changeable and you can't get into any sort of groove. So you have to take that into account. But Lando is doing, on the medium tyre, he's doing 24.4, 24.7, 24.5, 25.0. Fernando is doing a 25.0, but he's doing a 24.2, he's doing a 23.8. So right now, Alpine on the race tyre, looking very strong, looking sort of McLaren strong, which is, again, the first time we've seen that this year. Esteban Ocon right up there as well. I'm just cherry picking here only for time because, I don't want to drone on forever and you can see what the times were anyway. What else? I think Mick Schumacher deserves a big thumbs up. I'm a big Mick Schumacher fan, so have been for a long time. So really pleased to see him going well. He drove well, and the car is obviously very difficult. I mean, Nikita Mazepin just does not look like a racing driver really at the moment. He's so at sea in that car. But Mick actually getting the best out of it and doing a very, very good job, I thought. And there was another nice moment when Daniel Ricciardo's race engineer said to him, Lando's carrying more speed out of turn 7 into turn 8. I thought it was interesting, but that is the benchmark for Daniel now. He's absolutely queuing off what Lando's doing in terms of gauging his own pace and his own improvement graph. But he did actually have a better day than he's had all year, and he looked as if he was enjoying driving the car, a bit like Fernando for the first time this year, and there's a little bit of the old Daniel Ricciardo in that. So we could well see a very good race from Daniel on Sunday, his sort of conditions as well, if they stay like this, and also Fernando, of course. So, yeah, it was good to see Daniel going well. And then, of course, Pierre Gasly, brilliant as ever in the AlphaTauri Honda, although on this occasion, Yuki Tsunoda, his young Japanese teammate, didn't look quite as sharp as he had, say, in Bahrain. And, of course, he had that shunt in qualifying in Imola as well. So if you put together that shunt and just wanting to get back into Formula One again in a relatively logical way, and not having driven around Portimao before, it was no surprise to see him a little bit adrift of Pierre Gasly. Speaking of being adrift, let's just have a look at the gaps between the teammates, and that'll be the end of this video. So Lewis was 0.2 quicker than Valtteri Bottas, about right. Max Verstappen 0.4 quicker than Sergio Perez. Carlos Sainz A big gap to Charles Leclerc, but we've talked about that. Esteban Ocon on the red, on the soft tyre, 0.1 quicker than Fernando Alonso, so not much in that one. Pierre Gasly half a second quicker than Yuki Tsunoda. Daniel Ricciardo was a tenth of a second ahead of Lando Norris, but Lando didn't have a great day. But anyway, that means Daniel's kind of picking it up a bit. Lance Stroll half a second quicker than Sebastian Vettel, who again just didn't look like the old Sebastian Vettel. George Russell a second quicker than Nicholas Latifi. That's how good he was. Mick Schumacher 1.3 seconds quicker than Nikita Mazepin, and Kimi Räikkönen a tenth quicker than Antonio Giovinazzi. But Antonio only drove in the afternoon because the very talented young Englishman Callum Ilott drove in FP1 for Alfa Romeo. Did a very good job as well. Okay, that's Friday at Portimao, Portugal. I'd just like to end, it's not a sad note, it's just a note of me talking to you about a race driver that I've always respected and admired. I mean, he was totally mega, well, why wouldn't I? Vic Elford. And let me just tell you this, in case you didn't know this. We're talking the beginning of 1968. I know it was a long time ago, but nonetheless, it was a year just like this is a year, and the days were the same. Mind you, it was a bit wet and cold on occasions. In the space of about 2 months, Vic Elford won in a Porsche 911 in the snow. He won the Monte Carlo Rally. Then he went to Daytona and won the Daytona 24 Hours for Porsche. Then he came back to Europe and won the Targa Florio for Porsche. And then, because he'd been so successful, he accepted an offer to drive a factory Cooper BRM, which was not a good Formula One car, in the French Grand Prix at Rouen. It poured with rain that day. There was a terrible accident. Joe Schlesser was killed in the experimental air-cooled Honda very early in the race. But Vic drove from the back of the grid to finish fourth. So in the space of a couple of months, he won Monte Carlo, Daytona, the Targa Florio, finished fourth in his first Grand Prix. He didn't have the greatest of Formula One careers after that. He should have, because he's an extremely talented driver. But he's so good at sports cars, he just was overwhelmed with offers, really, and that was his career thereafter. Marvellous guy, articulate and brilliant. Here's a picture of him, and these are pictures from Peter Nygaard, and that's a shot at Rouen 68. There's Vic in the Cooper on the outside on the left. And interestingly, that's Joe Schlesser just in front of him. Obviously, it may well have been lap one of the race, if not the formation lap, I suspect. And in front of the Honda, there's Piers Courage in the Parnell BRM. Lovely to see that. Anyway, there's Vic in action. The reason I'm talking about all of this is that Brian Redman's son, James, through Brian, alerted me to the sad news that Vic has cancer and he's just broken his leg as well. He's in very bad shape financially. He's in Florida, in America. And I just thought it'd be nice to put the GoFundIt link that the Redman family have set up with an American journalist, Marshall Pruitt, just to raise a bit of money for Vic and to show him that we care. You know, it breaks my heart that we don't have some sort of benevolent fund for drivers in Vic's situation. The reason we don't is because Formula One, which is obviously the pinnacle of our sport, sold all its rights in 2000, and all the money really that could have gone back into the sport just disappeared. 2 billion euros worth. Anyway, we won't go down that path, but there isn't any sort of fund out there. Vic's not in great shape. It would be wonderful to make his life a little bit easier and to take some of the pain away. A great racing driver. I think he gave a lot of us a lot of pleasure. And I come back to this other thing about the past. The reason we're here today and we're enjoying talking about Lewis and Max and Charles and Daniel and Lando is because of what other racing drivers have done in the past. It's all one continuous stream. So it's absolutely no obligation at all, but I thought it'd be nice to have that link to the GoFundMe page. Anyway, thanks for watching and see you tomorrow for an update after qualifying for the Portuguese Grand Prix at Portimao.